Welcome to the Vintage Hollywood Archive. Jackie Kennedy revolutionized the U.S. art scene. She invited different artistic individuals to headline presentations in the White House. She also fought for civil rights and sought to eliminate certain prejudices in the U.S. The graceful lady lost a child and a husband within the span of months, but she remained strong. Jackie Kennedy was like a rock star. She was unyielding against adversities. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Vintage Hollywood Archive channel. People remember Jackie Kennedy for her impeccable fashion sense. Her suits were tailored to her slim and sexy body, with her head adorned with her iconic pillbox hat. She bore a striking image that has been burned into the minds of many. It is easy to forget that her iconic suit and pillbox hat are also a reminder of her sorrow. Jackie has suffered losses that can cripple the mind of many people. She lost her third child, Patrick Kennedy, to a lung ailment shortly after his birth. Then, in the middle of her anguish, Jackie lost her beloved husband. In the space of a few months, she lost more than most people have. However, millions mourned with her, and that was precisely why she couldn't get over the death as easily as most people would get over such a loss. Her husband was an iconic president of the United States of America, and her grief was magnified. While Jackie's losses are an integral part of her history, it would be unfair to her to reduce her story to one of loss, just as it would be unfair to reduce her as nothing more than a glamorous first lady. Although, truth be told, it's easier to focus on fashion. Not many first ladies shared her sense of fashion. She was a part of the International Best Dressed Hall of Fame in 1965 and was part of Time magazine's all-time 100 fashion icons. Also, Forbes included her as part of their trendy 10 fashion icons. It is not surprising that she made these lists. The woman commissioned a fashion designer to create a look for her as the new First Lady. Her fashion designer chose the look that Jackie would be known for years. Despite her tenderness, Kennedy was a legendary lady who led a revolution in the White House, a revolution she had begun to plan long before she became the First Lady of the White House. Her revolution wasn't one of bloodshed, but an artistic and historical one. Her revolution was to return the White House's connections to the past. That dreary Mason Blanche, Mrs. Kennedy expressed her disappointment when she visited the White House as a guest of Mamie Eisenhower, the First Lady at the time, and saw cheap items of furniture decorating the White House. This reinforced how she initially felt when she visited the White House as a tourist. During her first visit as a tourist, she couldn't make heads or tails of where they could visit and the historical items on display. To Kennedy, the White House was like a museum, and it shouldn't be dotted with fountains. She felt the White House, being a place of such immense historical value to America, should be filled with historical items. So, despite her devotion to her husband and children, she wanted to do more for her country when she became First Lady. She wanted to change the image of the White House to the most perfect house in the United States. But the question was, how would she do it? Congress only allocated $50,000 to cater for White House alterations, but what Kennedy wanted wasn't an alteration, but a restoration. The former First Lady hated the word alteration or redecoration. She explained what she wanted to do. Everything in the White House must have a reason for being there. It would be sacrilege merely to redecorate it, a word I hate. It must be restored, and that has nothing to do with decoration. Whether restoration or redecoration, she didn't have the money for it, and at the time, she didn't have political backing, but Jackie wasn't someone who gave up that easily. Politicians were rumbling about her plans, as they felt such plans could attract criticism and make them lose public favor. They would rather the historical executive mansion have cheap furniture rather than its memorable relics. The solution to what the politicians feared was the White House Fine Art Committee, which the First Lady created upon the advice of Clark Clifford. Then, Mrs. Kennedy ensured the creation of the Office of the White House Curator. The committee was responsible for locating and restoring items that should be in the executive mansion. With the committee, Jackie could get external funding that was sorely needed. Jackie began to select the members of the committee, and she selected the best hands for the job. However, she wasn't a passive bystander, too. The elegant former First Lady was at the center of everything. She researched to discover the historical items which were originally in the White House and have them returned to the White House. An example was the Cézanne paintings, taken from the National Gallery of Art and returned to the original positions in the presidential palace. Also, she scoured the entire executive mansion as if on a treasure hunt to find hidden pieces. She uncovered several of these pieces, including the legendary Resolute desk. The desk was a gift from Queen Victoria to President Rutherford B. Hayes, and it was made from the wood of the ship HMS Resolute. The people began to buy into what Mrs. Kennedy was doing, and people who had memorable pieces of the executive mansion began to return them for free, despite spending a fortune obtaining these pieces from auctions. Even the politicians in Congress wanted to become a part of Jackie's culture and artistic revolution. They passed a law in late 1961, effectively turning the executive mansion into a museum. So pieces donated to the presidential palace were treated as museum property and were kept at the Smithsonian when they weren't on display. With that law, the habit of presidents taking a piece of the White House with them when leaving the office became outlawed. In addition, the resolution had now become greater than it formerly was and couldn't be easily undone by anybody. To further support these resolution efforts, the White House Historical Association was created, and the association, in conjunction with the former First Lady, created the White House An Historic Guide. This guide was to allow tourists to have guidance when touring the presidential palace. Jackie didn't want anyone to feel as she felt during her first tour of the White House. Media houses were also curious about the efforts of Jackie in making the White House a cultural trove for American citizens. Life magazine wrote an article about Mrs. Kennedy's efforts in late 1961, but it was on CBS television that the general public could see the fullest extent of what their president's wife was doing. Jackie agreed with CBS to conduct a televised tour of the executive mansion in early 1962, and Jackie took a record 56 million viewers on a memorable tour of the executive mansion. The tour greatly displayed the White House's wealth of history, culture, and arts. But her work wasn't done yet. It extended to the surroundings of the White House. Jackie Kennedy described the President's Rose Garden as integral to the executive mansion's history. She commissioned her friend, Bunny, to redesign the garden to make it truer to its purpose as a place where the president can cool off or host guests. Jackie's vision of having the executive mansion connected to the past involved the preservation of the homes across the presidential palace. These homes surrounded Lafayette Square, and the government wanted to pull them down and replace them with government office buildings. Due to Jackie's influence, the buildings were preserved, and the government offices were instead built behind them. Sadly, just as she was on the cusp of completing her work, death claimed her husband, and her stay at the executive mansion was cut short. The reign of the Queen of Camelot was over. However, her presence is still felt in the halls of the mansion as her work continues to maintain an imposing presence. Jackie was not your average woman. She was graceful and powerful and had a knack for outshining the president when they traveled outside the United States. One such travel was when Jackie traveled with JFK to France. JFK was just another random man to the people there, and they focused their warmth on Jackie, who charmed everyone with her smile and fluent French. A man who had grown to become the center of attraction was just a bystander. JFK remarked, "I am the man who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris, and I have enjoyed it." JFK and the French people weren't the only ones to think Jackie was awesome. Famous violinist Isaac Stern thought among the same lines too. Isaac was grateful for the return of the fine arts to the presidential palace. To him, it was a much-needed statement in the American culture scene. Advisor Clark Clifford was also full of praise for Jackie when she returned from that iconic visit to Paris. He described her as more than outstanding, diplomatic, and gracious. But as discreet as she was, she lost some tact when she reportedly insulted Queen Elizabeth. Reportedly, Jackie wasn't impressed by Buckingham Palace and its queen, who she felt was boring. Reports say that the queen heard the remarks, but there aren't any official confirmations. However, the queen might have been intentionally boring. The queen, a creature of tradition, didn't want to entertain some members of Jackie's entourage, namely Jackie's sister and her husband, owing to them being divorcees. The queen had to bow to pressure to allow the two to attend, but ensured Jackie's preferred members of the royal family weren't around. Although the two hit it off nicely, chatting away with Mrs. Kennedy expressing her disdain for the media trappings of being a public citizen. However, she abhorred reservations that may have stemmed from her feelings that the Queen resented her. Even as amazing and praiseworthy as the former First Lady was, she wasn't immune to insecurity. It was a surprise that Jackie became a person that would be praiseworthy. She had always had the potential ever since she was a child. As a child, she had always been intelligent with a large appetite for reading. Before she began school, Jackie had finished her children's book. Like any other child, Kennedy had a knack for mischief. While being a darling child, the prettiest little girl, very clever, very artistic, as described by one of her teachers. She had everything a child needed to thrive, but her little utopia came crashing down by the age of 10. Her dad and mom divorced, and it took a toll on her. The quiet, private girl became even more private. However, she moved on, and her mother did her best to set her on the right path by having her learn classical ballet, learning French, how to ride horses. The young lady had the best extracurricular activities. Jackie became renowned as a young horse rider and was honored for her skill. When she concluded high school, she proceeded to college where she studied French, history, art, and literature. She traveled to Paris for her studies and fell in love with French culture and Europe. Returning to the States, she completed her college education and was ready for the real world. Her veins flowed with ambition as she chased the path of journalism. Her career choice is curious, seeing as Jackie remained a private person. Her first attempt at journalism was at 21 when she applied for work at Vogue. She got the job of junior editor, defeating 1,278 others who had also applied for the role. However, Vogue wasn't to the taste of the former First Lady and quit the first day. Some say she quit because Vogue didn't have a balanced workplace, which would hinder her chances of getting married to someone worthy of her. Her next job was the Washington Times-Herald newspaper under the name The Inquiring Camera Girl. She had a column where she took pictures of people, interviewed them on multiple issues, and creatively used their answers as part of her column. Soon she met JFK, who was a congressman, and they got married. Immediately, Jackie began to help shape JFK into becoming the iconic politician he was. She encouraged JFK to make use of his recovery period from a series of surgeries to write a book that detailed senators of the United States that put everything on the line to fight for what they were passionate about. When her husband announced his ambition to run for president, Jackie supported him, even if she preferred media obscurity and total privacy. She was also supposed to appear on campaign grounds along with her husband, but as she was pregnant with her second child, she had strict instructions to stay put. Still, in the house, she wasn't idle. The elegant lady began to make commercials, grant interviews, attend to campaign letters, and do what she knew how to do best: write. She had a newspaper column instrumental in building the public perception of her husband. For someone reluctant, Jackie had a political savvy that became useful for her husband. However, Jackie wanted to be obscure and protect her family when they won. She understood that being totally private was impossible. However, she tried. She used one of the White House's wings as a kindergarten for her children and other children. Jackie made media appearances and invited journalists to cover her and her children from time to time. Her preference for obscurity didn't mean that she lost her political savviness. She served as a goodwill ambassador for her husband's administration and helped improve her country's relationship with India and Pakistan. She was a committed wife to her husband, even as she knew of his philandering. As one of their family friends remarked, at the end of the day, Jack came back to Jackie. Despite his disloyalty, JFK never diminished the impact of his wife on his life. Their love endured past JFK's death, as Jackie did everything she could to immortalize her husband. The former First Lady invited the journalist Theodore White, who was to cover her husband's assassination, and convinced him not to focus on her husband's assassination. Rather, she told him to discuss Kennedy's utopic ambitions for the country and how JFK was the modern version of King Arthur of Camelot. Despite White's boss asking him to cut the Camelot part out, he didn't, and from there, the Camelot myth was born. Jackie remarried a Greek business tycoon and avoided the public with all her might. The former First Lady did this until she died in her home in 1994. She was laid to rest next to JFK, but her memory and legacy still burn on today. Her restoration of the White House, although incomplete, is still present in the wings of the Executive Mansion. Arts and cultures revived under her. So, when you tour the White House, the elegance you see was born from the resoluteness of one woman, Jackie Kennedy. The woman's job is to support the man from the background, they say. But then, why Marion Davies was a mistress and never a wife? Let's find out.